Okay, so we're going to get started today with exercise 206. And so the handout says exercise 207. That's my bad. Sorry about that. It's supposed to say 206. Made a mistake. So we are on the 6th day of class, therefore it is 206. So if you want to make a little note and cross that out, that's a mistake on my end. So we're going to do exercise 206 online on the course website. It's exercise 206. It's just the handout that was incorrect, that I made a mistake on. You got two handouts today. Obviously exercise 206, but then your assignment 201 handout as well. For your assignment 201, it is due on March 11th. So you've got a ways to go, almost a month to work on it. That's because you don't have the skills to do it all yet. We'll talk about organic shapes. We'll talk about pillows and fabrics and all that kind of thing for your seats. And I'll walk you through that a little bit later on. But I want you to start kind of thinking about it. There are certainly some skills that you have right now that you can start modeling. And I even suggest if you end up with extra time, go ahead and start designing and trying to come up with some of your shapes. After yesterday's class and today's class, you'll have a pretty good idea of kind of building some of the framework for your chair, if not the cushions themselves. So we'll get forward on that. It needs to have at least two materials. We're going to deal with something called texture mapping. We'll do that next Wednesday. Remember, next Monday's a holiday, so we don't have class. So we'll go a week and then come back on Wednesday. We'll deal with something called texture mapping, which has to do with how a texture is applied to an object, what the scale of that texture is, and that sort of thing. So we'll go through that next class. But it's going to have two materials. It's going to have appropriate texture mapping. We're not creating any kind of environment for this table and chair. It's a white background on a white infinite plane with a directional light. Kind of basically what we've been doing. For some of you, you'll want some of your materials to be glass or reflective metal or whatever. They don't always look great on that nice white background. So if you're in that circumstance, I will sit with you and we'll correct your file to give you some background or some sky color so that the reflections look a little bit better. That's kind of a one-on-one individual thing. I'm not going to teach you that until a little bit later in the semester, but I'd like to at least point that out. You're, of course, more than welcome to look at previous semesters' work so that you have an idea of the kinds of things that people have done. In terms of what you're turning in, I'm asking for 3 different renderings of your work. And these are important. It's important to pay attention to the fact that I'm asking for 3. If you turn in 1 rendering, or the same rendering 3 times, you'll get 33%. On your assignment, max. You get that? So that's not good. We don't want that. So I need all 3 renderings. You'll be graded on all 3 renderings. It'll be the average of those 3 renderings. Sometimes people like to turn in more renderings. That's fine too. But I'm going to pick the 3 first renderings that you show me to do the rendering. I'm not going to look through and pick the 3 best. I'll pick the ones that are first in the beginning. So if you want me to grade those ones, if you want me to grade certain ones and then provide extras, just make sure they're the first 3 when you upload them. And those will be the ones that I grade. Trying to think. It would be nice if you could print your best image on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper so that I have a paper record of it. I have been working with the print IT people about printing here. And for those of you not in my 135 class, if you're in any other class that needs to print, apparently, the way that it's set up right now, you can print to the 9500 to print in color, and it won't actually come out of the 9500 printer. It'll come out of the printer next to it. Go figure. But on the computer, you print to the 9500. So just FYI, if you want to print, that's the current state of printing in the ET buildings. So all of that needs to be turned in before I start talking on Monday. Uh-oh. I have conflicting dates. That's a problem. I'll have to look up which date it's supposed to be, whether it's the 19th or the 11th. I apologize. That's a week apart. So I'll figure it out and let you know. I hate making mistakes like that. And clearly, I wasn't on my A game when I made these handouts. So I'll go back and I'll double check what day that is supposed to be due. Actually, let me pull it up right now. Since I'm talking to you, you can make a correction right on your sheet. Bear with me for a second. It is due on Monday the 11th. So that second part is wrong. It's not the 19th. I don't even know if the 19th is a Monday. It should be the 11th. Okay? So make that correction now. I'm telling you all that right now. I will make the correction online so that it says it on the correct day online. It will be due on the 11th. And I'll remind you when it gets a little bit closer. So today for our exercise, in exercise 206, we're going to build something a little bit different. You're going to use a different set of skills to build this. And part of the reason I want to teach you this is I want you to learn about something called a sweep. And so we'll get into that in just a second. I'm going to go ahead and open up Rhino. It's going to be a brand new file today, so we don't need to work with our old files. You will come back to that bridge file next class, so make sure you did save that. I'm going to choose a large object inches template. All right, I have Rhino open. I'm ready to start drawing. So in part 1, I'm asking you to draw the shape to the right of the little handout here. And what that shape is it's 2 arcs that are 2-inch by 2-inch arcs, so it's a 2-inch radius. And then it is a 13-inch line and then another 2-inch radius arc. And when we start to draw arcs, we have a bunch of different options. And so you have to think about which of the options make sense. I'll start with this option first. And it asks me to start with the center of the arc. Well, I know that the center of the arc is actually 2 inches over, so here's a perfect opportunity to use my absolute coordinates. So I'm starting at point 0, 0 with this curve. My center of the arc would be at 2, 0. So I can type in 2, 0 and then press enter. There we go. Start of the arc would be back here 2 inches. Let me turn on ortho so I could go back and type in absolute coordinates again. It would be 0, 0. Or I could type at -2, 0. That would get me there as a relative coordinates. And then since I have ortho turned on, after I get the start of the arc, it's as simple as snapping to the end of the arc right there. And that gets me the first piece of my arc. I'm going to continue and go to the Polyline tool. I'll snap to the end. My snaps are not currently on, so I'll come down here, turn on Object Snap, turn on End, Mid, and Perpendicular. I will snap right there to that end, and I'm going to draw a line that is 13 inches. So I'll go ahead and type 13 and then enter. Just the direction. There it is. I'll press one more enter to finish, and now I have that line segment there as well. I need to draw the next little arc, so I'll come back to the arc tool. I'm going to use the same arc tool that I used last time right here. And I'm going to start by snapping to the center of the arc. I need to come down to where those two meet. And this is a perfect opportunity to use smart tracking. So to do that, make those go away for a second, I take the mouse and I hover over this end right there to set my point. And then I come down and I hover over that point. And I move them to where they intersect. I get 2 white lines at an intersection point. That's an easy way of snapping right to where it needs to go. I'll come straight up and snap to this end, and then fold it down to there. So I've drawn these arcs right there, over, and then down. Before I move on, though, I'd really like this to all be one joined curve. So I'll go ahead and select those. And I'll go up to the Edit menu and select Join. There it is. Perfect. So now I have that curve drawn, which is what I wanted to have drawn in this first step. And I'm going to move on to the Rotate 3D command. This is in step 2, to stand this up in the perspective view right here. So I'll use Rotate 3D. I'll go up to Transform, Rotate 3D. Alternatively, I could type Rotate 3D. And my start of rotation axis will be at this point. The end will be at that point. And my angle or first reference point is going to be out here in space just along the y-axis. And I'll stand that up. So it's standing up like that. So I drew it flat first and then rotated it to have it standing up in space. And now I have a guide for the kinds of things that I'm ultimately going to work with. It looks like I did it out of order. I joined first and then rotate 3D. You could do the opposite. I joined afterward. The point is that it's a joined curve. Now that I have that, I'm going to come over and pick the circle tool, this one, and I'll pick the circle center and a radius right here. And I'm going to draw a circle with a radius, a diameter of 1/2 inch. So the diameter would be 0.5, or the radius would be 0.25. So I'd either have to type in 0.25 here, or I could click on diameter and type in 0.5. Either way will get me to the same result. It's pretty obvious when you're building this if the circle is too big, because your whole pipe will end up looking too big. So make sure you pay attention to diameter versus radius. There it is. And so now what I want to create is I want to create a surface. So thus far, everything that I've made are just curves. They're just lines and curves in space. I'd like to create a surface that's a tube or a pipe, depending on which way you want to look at it, that follows along this line. And I'm going to do that by using a command called sweep. The sweep command essentially allows us to have a cross-section. So this would be my cross-section. This is what the pipe looks like. And then follow that cross-section along a guide, or a rail is what they call it. So I'm going to have nothing selected. I'm going to go up to Surface, and I'm going to choose Sweep One Rail. And when I choose Sweep One Rail, it's going to ask me first to select the rail. That would be the rail. Then it says Select Cross-Sectional Curve. That would be my cross-sectional curve. When I'm done, I'll go ahead and press Enter. It's going to ask me to drag the seam if I want to adjust it. I'm OK with the seam being there. I'll go ahead and press Enter. And I'm then going to continue with my sweep like that. I have this currently set as freeform. There's a couple other different options. I'll explain what those are a little bit more in detail. Freeform is generally what you're going to want. And then I'll go ahead and say OK. And when I do that, it builds a surface. I'll switch to shaded mode so you can see it. It builds a surface for me with this pipe having a bend on each end. So the way the sweep works is it doesn't matter what the geometry is as long as you have a cross-section and a rail. So for example, I could come in here and I could create, let me turn off ortho for a second. I could create a curve. Let me make that curve, whoops, have some vertical dimension to it. Move, V for vertical, and we'll bring that up a little bit. Just so that it's not a flat curve for you guys, so you can see that it works. And essentially, when I come down here, all I need is some kind of a cross-sectional area. So that cross-sectional area could be as simple as a pipe, like we did. Let me rotate 3D. Like that. And I could take that and I could sweep this just the same way. So sweep one. There's my rail. There's my cross-sectional curve. And there's my pipe. So it doesn't have to be something that's straight or very controlled. It can be basically anything you can draw, you can do this to. It also doesn't have to be a circle. So I can make this cross-sectional area something entirely different. I could make it a rectangle, for example. So I could say I want it like this. This is going to take a little bit of rotation, so bear with me for a second. So I could take this and I could sweep it along the rail. So again, sweep one is the command, or surface sweep one rail. My rail first, followed by my cross section. There's my seam, and it will build it. Now here's a place where these options start to matter. So currently this is at freeform. So as it goes, it follows along, and you see that it gets kind of vertical. We can change from freeform to road-like top, which is, when I preview it, going to keep it kind of like a bridge, where it keeps the cross-sectional curve flat. It doesn't allow it to ramp up on the sides. And therefore, we maintain kind of a ramp-like strategy here. There are other options like road-like front, roadlike right, you can play around with what these options do, hit preview, and you can see what happens as you start to create them, as you get different results. So let me go back to roadlike top, preview, there it is. I'm also not limited to having just one object. So I could take this object and create a second object next to it. Let's even move that over just a little bit more, like that. So there's a gap between those two. And I can do a sweep 1. There's my rail. My cross-sectional curves are both of these. I could press enter. I'll press enter again. Oops. Sweep 1. Cross-sectional curves would be this and this. Of course, it's not doing it the way I want it to. I love it when illustrations don't work the way you want them, right? There's a rail, cross-section, cross-section. Somehow it doesn't like me. Well, I'll have to come back and see why that's not working for me. Anyway, I don't have to. Let me do it with just one at a time. We had this sweep. Rail there. There's that one. I'm going to go road-like top again so that it's flat. And we'll say OK, and we'll keep it there. Then I'll do the same thing with this side. I'll sweep 1 with this curve. Notice that the two aren't touching anymore. They don't have to touch. They can be floating. And we can maintain the same space between the two all the way around. Obviously, this is getting a funny little kink there. And we've got some self-intersecting curves because it's just too steep for it to work as it turns around. OK, so those are all the sweep 1s. We also have the ability to do what's called a sweep 2, where we have 2 rails. So let me add real quick another curve that is inside of the first curve. Oh, let's go outside of the first curve because, well, yeah. So I just gave myself another curve here. Let me turn the points on so I can make a few adjustments. Just move those up a little bit, like that. OK, so this time I have 2 rails. When I do a sweep, I can't type, sweep 2, it's going to ask me for the first rail, followed by the second rail, there, then the cross-section. And so the distance between these curves is going to start to change what the cross-section does. I'll go ahead and press enter so you can see this. There's my seam. There we go. And so the further apart they become, the bigger the cross-section becomes. So in the back here, it's a little bit thicker. The closer together they become, the smaller the cross-section becomes. So we're controlling it with both. So if you wanted to do a snake, for example, where it got big in one section and then got smaller, or a worm or whatever, you could do the same thing with 2 rails. OK, so enough of the sidetracking explanations over here about sweeps. We're going to work with this shape as well. So let me zoom selected on it. There it is. And we've created this shape, which is good. It's now time to move on and create a little circle at the very bottom here. So I'm going to go back to the circle tool. I'm going to snap to the center right there. And this time I'm still in diameter, so I can type in 1.5 inches. Remember, if you're in radius mode, you would have to divide that in half and get 0.75. And there's my little circle. I'm going to go ahead and extrude this. So I'll go to my surface, extrude curve straight. We've done the extrusions before. Remember, though, that we want to make sure that solid is set to yes, so we get a top and a bottom on this little button. And we're going to do an extrusion down 0.25 inches. Because it's starting here, I want to make sure that I go down, so I'll type in negative 0.25 inches. And I'll press enter, and it's going to extrude going down from where I started. Same thing, I'll come back to my circle. We'll go to the end there. This was 1.5 as my diameter. We'll then extrude curve. It's going to be solid, yes, that's good, and it's going to be negative 0.25 inches like that. So that then gives us two little buttons on either end of this rod. Now it's time to add the other button. So there's a second button that's below this first button. And I'm going to take these two, and I could do them one at a time, or I could do them as both. But I'll show it to you one at a time, so I end up repeating myself twice. I'm going to go ahead and use the copy command to create a second one of these. I'll go up to transform and then copy. And point to copy from, it really actually doesn't matter what the point to copy from is. I could click on the surface itself. I could click over here in space. It doesn't matter, because before I click, I'm going to change to be in vertical mode. So I've clicked on vertical. Vertical is set to yes. Then I'll click, and I'm going to type in negative 0.75 inches. And it's going to go down by 0.75 inches. I'm going to do the same thing over here for practice. There it is. We'll go to copy, so transform and then copy, or you could type in copy. Vertical is going to be set to yes. I'll click somewhere, doesn't matter where, and we'll do negative 0.75 inches, like that. I'll press enter to finish, and now I have this bar or rod or whatever you want to call it. I have two buttons on either end that are separated by a ½ inch of space. Long term, we're going to end up putting some glass in between those two pieces, there and there. The thing that we're making today is it's called a spider clamp. If we did an image search, I'll show you what it looks like. We're essentially building one of these. Okay, so it's a little spider clamp. The buttons are on either side of a glass panel. There's a little cross section, and then there's a rod with a tension cable outside of it. There is obviously more to making these work. Generally, they go in both directions. We're only making it in one direction. So from a structural standpoint, what we're making is not structurally sound. It's not going to work. But for practice, this is a good kind of object to try to make, because we're dealing with tubes and sweeps and that sort of thing. So sometimes it's good to show you what we're making, because it helps you kind of sort this out a little bit. OK, so I have this shape ready. The next thing I need is a second copy of this shape. So I have a choice when I make this copy. I can copy it. So we could go to edit, transform, copy. I could copy it and move it over here. If I do it this way, I would need to select this one and then rotate this one. I'll go up to transform and then rotate. It's just a regular rotate, not a 3D rotate. And we're going to rotate from there to there. And then I need to move this one back. So I go to transform and then move, snap to the midpoint, snap to the midpoint, and then I'd end up with my two shapes intersecting. That's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it, and I'm just going to make a second copy of this over here to illustrate my point, would be instead of copying and then moving back, I can take this object, I can go to transform and then copy, or type copy, and one of the options is in place. So when I do that, it copies it right on top of itself. So there's no points to click, it just makes a copy right on top of itself. It's still selected, so I can immediately go into rotate, and it's just a regular rotate, not a rotate 3D. Snap to the middle and type in 90, and it'll rotate 90 degrees. That was many fewer clicks and much less effort to do. So depending on your strategy for how you do this, Rhino keeps things selected, you can actually start to move rather quickly through these rotations. If you end up moving in and then moving it back, no harm. Just takes you an extra 30 seconds or so. So I have this established. It's time to take this shape and rotate it by 45 degrees so that it lands with each of these buttons on these 4 points. So I'll go ahead and go up to regular rotate again. It's transform and then rotate, or type rotate. I'm going to rotate from 0, 0, which is right there. I could type in 0, 0 as well. My reference is right along there, and I'm rotating to 45 degrees this time. So I'll actually type in 45, and we can see that it now lines up on my grid. So I've made this part of the clamp. It's now time to move forward into the next part of the clamp. There's a drawing on the back that tries to show you what you're making. It's an elevation view coupled with two different side views. It's a little bit confusing for those of you not used to reading architectural drawings because I have a one projection on a side so that you can see it with measurements. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and build the rest of it for you. You'll be responsible for this exercise for this next phase yourself. I didn't write out the step-by-step because this is part of your learning process. It's using all the same skills that I just did, but you're going to figure out what order to do them in. So I will start with this. Essentially what we're building is the rod that goes off the top of this, and then the little donut that goes on the end of the rod. So I'm going to go ahead and build it over here flat, and then I'll end up rotating it afterward. So I'll start here with a line, a polyline. Turn on ortho here for a second. That is the length of the little rod, which is 2 feet. So I'll go ahead and type in 2 feet. Actually, it's 1 foot 9 1/4. Sorry, I should read my own stuff. So 1 foot 9.25 inches, like that. And I'll go ahead and click, and then I'll press enter to finish. So there's that line. I want to make that a cylinder, so I'll go ahead and use my circle tool, and I will draw a diameter of 0.5. There it is. I need to rotate this into the third dimension, so I'll do rotate 3D again. Dimension, transform, rotate 3D. And I'll stand that up like that. Alternatively, by the way, I wouldn't have to go into that if I use the other views. So I have this right now, it's set flat on the ground plane, but if I switched my view, say, into the front view, I don't have to do the rotations anymore. See how it's already standing up for me? I could go ahead and just type in 0.5 as long as I'm in the front view, and it would give me my little circle here in the correct orientation. I can now perform the sweep. So we'll go back to my surface sweep one rail. There's my rail. There's my cross-sectional curve. Enter, seam is fine. And there's my, switch this back to freeform. And there's my tube. Right, like that. Yeah?
Does it just default to like a selected thickness?
This is infinitely thin, actually. Okay. So it's not a solid, it's just a thin little shell. That's the way Rhino models everything, even if it is a, quote, solid object. So if I made this with a cylinder, for example, it would still be, it would act like it was a solid object, but it's really not. It's just a set of surfaces that define an area inside and outside. That's how Rhino works, which is distinctly different, by the way, this is a total side note, from like 3D Max, which is a solids modeling program. The things you have are solid and you carve away from them. So it's a little bit different. This is a surface modeler. So we'll get different results. So it's time then to switch to the donut on the end here. And so the donut has a couple circles involved. First circle, the diameter is only 3/8 of an inch, so it's smaller. So that is 3, oops, helps if I type it correctly, 3 divided by 8 inches, or 3/8 inches, or 0.375, is that what it is? 0.375 if you wanted to do it mathematically. I'll go ahead and press enter. And there's the inside. Notice that that is smaller than this current tube. I'll come back and I'll do another one, and this one is going to be larger. It is 1 1/4 inches. So 1 inch and 3/4, 75 inches. If you wanted, by the way, to type, if you didn't want to do the 0.75, I could do 1-3/4 inches, and I would get 1 1 3/4. So you can actually type in 1 3/4 inches like that. So there's the small inner one, the larger outer one. I now need a donut to be created here. And so I can do that with a sweep as well. Let me create the cross-sectional curve first. I'll come back to my circle, but instead of doing the center and the radius, I'm going to choose a circle that is a diameter. So I'll pick this one. And I'd like to snap across, so I can go from mid to mid here. If the snaps aren't working, if it wasn't on that side, if it was, say, right here on the end that you want it to work, you can also turn on a snap called Quadrant Snap, which essentially is north, south, east, and west of a circle. So in that sense, I could snap to there and snap to there if I wanted to. I'm going to do it along the side. I'll snap to here, and I'll snap to there. Once I've created this circle, I need to rotate 3D. So I'll go back to transform and then rotate 3D. And I will stand this one up like that. So I've created my cross-sectional curve. I have my rails, and I'm ready to create the sweep. So I'll go up to surface and then sweep one rail. I could do it with two. It doesn't matter. It's consistent. Sweep one rail, select rail. It doesn't matter whether it's the inside or the outside. I'll pick the inside. Cross-sectional curve. There's my circle. I'll press enter and then enter. And it then builds my little donut on the end. Now the astute question here would be, yes, you did the sweep, but couldn't I come over here and use my primitives where I have my donut? Right here, it's a torus. Sorry, I keep calling it a donut. Apparently I think about donuts too much. In this example, my center of my torus would be there. Then it asks for the radius. That would be there. Then it asks for, oops, looks like I needed to find the middle of those two. But I could make it that way. So just because I make it using a sweep doesn't necessarily mean that you couldn't create it using one of the standard primitives. That's up to you. For me, using the sweeps, I'm really comfortable with the sweeps. I would rather do it than figure out what it meant by where the various diameters were and whatever. So I'll do that sweep one more time. It would be under surface, sweep one rail. There would be my rail. There would be my cross-sectional curve. There's my seam. And there's my torus. Yeah, question?
What was the radius of the outer circle?
1.75. So it's 3/8 on the inside, 1.75 on the outside. Now, as I start to look at this, the tube that I drew first intersects the torus, and I've got part of it sticking out in the center here. It's kind of ugly geometry. So really, I need to do some trimming work to clean this up a bit. So I can do the trimming work where I pick the torus here. I could type trim, and I could get rid of the inside pieces like that. And so that's reasonable, but I still have some intersecting happening here. Does it really matter? No. But would it be cleaner to get rid of it? Yeah. But I can't figure out how to select that piece. This is where using one of your different views can make a difference. So we've worked primarily in wireframe and shaded mode in this class. We've touched rendered a little bit. But down here we have a couple other ones. We have ghosted and X-ray. Ghosted is particularly good for this purpose. So when you have a ghosted view, we can see through our objects, and I can say, oh yeah, there's that piece that's kind of intersecting. I can select the torus, type trim, and I can come in here and actually select the surface inside. And because it's ghosted, it's allowing me to see through and also pick that object. If I was in shaded mode, it wouldn't pick that object. It would pick the object on top. So the ghosted mode can be particularly useful for that. Furthermore, I could take this object here, and I could trim that little piece out. So it's actually hollow all the way through if I wanted to. Not necessary, but it's definitely something that you could do. So I have those two pieces ready. I'll go back to shaded mode for a second. It's time to stand that up and put it right here on the center. So let me use a rotate 3D to stand this up. I'll select it. I'll go up to my transform, rotate 3D. We'll start there at the bottom. My angle of reference is going straight up. We'll stand that up. Then we'll go ahead and move it. I'll go to transform and then move. And I'm going to snap from this point here to that point there. The alternative to that, if I did this a full 2 feet tall, which is what it says instead of the 1 foot 9 1/4, the alternative to that would be that I would have this snap down at the ground level and then trim it off afterward. So there's still a little bit of intersecting geometry here. That's a little bit nasty. We could trim that out. I could switch to ghosted mode again. I'll select this, type trim, and come in here and select my surface. There it is. That's been trimmed out. That looks pretty good. Like that. I could then select this object and trim again. Oops. Sometimes you pick the wrong object here. So here's an example where it really doesn't. There we go. I got it. Sometimes picking on one of the edges can make a big difference when you're trying to select the piece to trim out. There it is. So now that's been trimmed out. I'll press Enter to finish. And I have my resulting geometry. I'll switch back over into the shaded mode. And from here, I need to continue with the little cable that's going to go from this point. And I can do the same thing. I could start with a line, snap right to the center, right there. I can draw off 6 feet, like that. And then I can perform a sweep again. So up to surface, sweep one rail. There's my rail. My curve was from that geometry when I first drew my torus. And I'll go ahead and sweep that and create that. Could I do this as a cylinder instead? Sure. Just another way of drawing it. So I've built this up, and that's good. Next thing I need is I need the piece of glass for behind this. So I'll go ahead and use my standard primitives. That'll work. But I'd like my piece of glass to start directly underneath this center, which happens to be at 6 inches by 6 inches. So I can go ahead and just type in 6, 6 as my starting point. Alternatively, I could snap to this and then move it down afterward. That would work as well. And so this sheet of glass is going to be from that point. I'm going to use the relative coordinates. So it would be at 4 feet, 6 feet. I'll press Enter. And my thickness would be negative 0.5 inches. And there it is. The only problem with that is that it's still a little bit high. It needs to be moved down. So I will type in move, select vertical, and it needs to go down by 0.25, so negative 0.25 inches. And there it is right in between. Oh, looks like I made a mistake. This should be a little bit thicker. Opportunity to use scale 1D. I'll go to transform scale 1D. I want to make sure it's only changing in that one direction. So this was from there to there, and I want it to be 0.5 inches. Not sure why my type didn't come in. I must have mistakenly typed 0.25. So there it is, lined up. This is just one piece of what we're going to end up making a big wall. So we're going to talk about that next class, and we'll make a big glass wall out of it. But this is the component that will make up that glass wall. And this is what I'm asking you to make today. So I need to get it up in its vertical direction. So I'll take the whole thing. We'll do a rotate 3D on it. So I'll go to transform, rotate 3D. And when I do it, I'm going to actually use the glass to line this up. So we'll start at the face of the glass right here. We'll go out along the x-axis, go out along the y-axis, and stand that up right there like that. So there's the vertical piece of glass. Now that I have the geometry done, it's time to once again introduce materials and a basic light and all that sort of thing. So this is review, and I told you guys that I'm going to repeat myself over and over to beat this into you some way. So I'm going to use my layers first and kind of organize my file. So first off, I have the clamp itself, the spider clamp itself, which would be these components right there. Let me go ahead and make a layer for that. I'll take layer 1 here, and I will rename layer 1 to be spider clamp. I'll right-click on spider clamp and say change object layer, and now the whole clamp is on that layer. I have my glass panel here. We'll put that on layer 2. I'll right-click and say change object layer, and then we'll call layer 2 here glass panel. Does that have 2 ends in it? Or we just call it glass? There we go. So I have a spider clamp and I have the glass. Next thing would be one of these layers becoming the environment layer. So I'll double click on layer 3. We'll call that environment. Layer 4 we will call light. And layer 5 we will call infinite plane. I'm going to start calling it the IP like I normally do. So I have infinite plane, I have light, and I have environment. I'll select both the light and the infinite plane. We'll drag them up onto the environment layer so that they're sublayers of the environment layer. And now it's time to create those. So the infinite plane, I need to load the V-Ray toolbars to do that, or I can type viz infinite plane to create it, but I'll go ahead and load the toolbars. I do that by going up to the Tools menu, selecting Toolbar Layout, and then going to File and Open. And you should by now have this saved on your flash drive, having done this many times. It's in my Resources folder. There it is. And there's my V-Ray toolbars. When I'm done, I'll say OK. And I can then create the infinite plane. So I already have the infinite plane on the infinite plane layer, or it's the current layer, so it drops directly onto it. Now I need to move this down. So I'll go into Move, select Vertical, so that the whole object is showing, like that. So I've just moved it down a little bit. When I'm done, I'll go back. Let me make the spider clamp the active layer again. I will lock the infinite plane. That way I can't accidentally select it. We'll make the light the active layer. I'll create a helper object, a box. And I'll come up and use the directional light, which is the blank button up here at the top. And I will snap to that corner and that corner. And then I'll go ahead and delete the box itself. We can confirm that that worked by switching modes into rendered mode. OK, we're going to see it with some shadow. That's good. The light did work. We'll switch back to shaded mode. And now I have the light installed. So my environment has the light in the infinite plane. I have my spider clamp, and I have my glass for my rendering. Next piece of the puzzle is materials. I'll go to my V-Ray materials library. And instead of choosing glass, remember, I have no background. It's not going to reflect anything of use. I'm going to create a fake glass. And you guys can all do this because we did this earlier in the semester as well. I will right-click on Scene Materials. I'll say Create Material Standard. And all I'm going to do is make a semi-transparent blue material. Nothing too fancy. So I'll change the diffuse color to be blue. Maybe about like that. And I'll change my transparency to be maybe dark gray. And once I've done that, I can preview it and say, yep, there it is. It's kind of a bluish tint. I'll then rename this to be blue glass, or anything else you want to name it. And I'm going to right-click on it and say Apply Material to Layer, because my glass is all on the glass layer. So I'm not going to apply it to the object. I'm going to apply it to the layer itself. Next thing would be to load the metal for the clamp. I'll right-click on Scene Materials. I'll say Load Material, and this is time to pick up my V-Ray material library. And we'll go into metal, and I would pick some form of metal. Some of the metal is very shiny, which is going to turn out really white because my whole background is white. So just be aware. Some of the other ones aren't so bad. Let me go to my brushed metal and see how that one turns out. Try to preview it, see what it looks like. Still a little bit shiny. Maybe I'd try something different. Let's try the matte aluminum. Take a look at that one. Yeah, that one looks a little bit better, not quite so shiny. So I'll go ahead and right-click on the aluminum and say Apply Material to Layer. And it's going to go on the spider clamp layer. There it is. So now it's time to perform the rendering. Now, a couple things. One, if I have my view set so that I'm seeing the sky, I need to make sure I change the sky to white. If I have my view set so I'm looking down on the object, it doesn't make any difference. So that's a choice that you can make. So I could either perform the rendering here, looking down on my object, like that. Or I can go into my V-Ray options. I can come down to environment, and I can change the background color from black to white. You could even do a light blue if you wanted to. And I'll go ahead and close that, and that would allow me to render it at this angle with the background still being entirely white. So when I'm done today, I'm going to perform this rendering to get the sample. I recognize, and you guys can see this on mine, that the metal doesn't show up that well. If you really want to change it to be something that shows up a little bit better, you could make your own material that's more of a dark gray that doesn't have a shine to it. That would be fine. It would help you see the geometry a little bit better. Again, it's because we have no context to render. So we're not seeing the reflections the way we would normally on glass. When you're done, you'll save this and post this to the course website. You do not need to write comments on this exercise because everybody's making the same thing. Save this file, this Rhino file, because we will need it next class. You'll be working with it. And if you finish early today, you can start working on your table and chair, or at least thinking about the kind of table and chair you might want to do some research on it, etc. I'm relatively loose about the definition of a table and a chair. So if you can make an argument that something is a table and that something is a chair, I'm open to it. You'll just have to convince me that it's a table and a chair. But if you look at the samples, I've had a lot of leniency when it comes to what the definition of a table and a chair really means. The idea of a chair is something that you sit on. The idea of a table is something you put something on. That is not you. Okay? So get creative about it. You're only responsible for one chair and one table. Some people do one chair and then make 6 of them when they do the rendering. It's the same chair. It would be like a dining room table set. You could do that if you wanted to. You could also do one custom special chair that had a built-in little desk, and that would qualify as a table and a chair. So like I said, I'm relatively lenient, and you guys can go ahead and think about it. It should be a unique design. I don't want you just going and doing a Mies chair or something. That defeats the purpose. So come up with something. Figure out how you're going to make it because it's coming out of your head. That's the purpose of the assignment in the first place, is trying to model something that you're designing. If there's, yeah? No, don't just copy a famous chair. Give me something unique that is to you. There are, I should mention this, not that any of you would fall into this trap, there are sites online that provide pre-made objects that are 3D, like chairs and tables and that sort of thing. If you use one of those, I've seen them. I know you use them, and I can tell. I know what your abilities are. I know when I see something that has perfectly folded sheets and lots of ripples that you're not at that level yet, okay? So just be aware that I'm aware, okay? Do something yourself. You'll get a whole lot more out of it than just copying something online, okay? All right, I'll turn you guys loose. Let me know if you have any questions.